Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. So this is our agenda we've got for you. I'll start with a bit of a welcome and introduction around ORCID and and then move on to the roles and responsibilities of the ORCID board. I'll then hand over to board chair, nominations committee chair, Carly, and Carly will talk around the nominations process and criteria, and then hand over to Stephanie, which will then talk about the ORCID Researcher Advisory Committee, ORAC. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time at the end, as Kimberly mentioned, for questions and answers. So let's get going. So first of all, a bit of an intro around ORCID. So ORCID is a global research infrastructure organization that's registered in the USA. We've launched a number of things, but in particular, our registry was launched back in 2012, and it's happily reached our goal of financial break even. So as an organization, ORCID is financially sustainable, and that occurred in 2019. We're sustained through our fees from our member organisations and those subscriptions for using ORCID services. And we have many of our member organisations here today. So we thank you so much for your continued support and engagement with us and ORCID and using ORCID services within your communities. I mentioned community, and that's super important to ORCID. We are a community-built organisation which is governed by a board of directors. And that's what we're here to talk to about today. The board of directors represents our membership with a wide stakeholder representation. ORCID is also supported by 37 amazing, committed and dedicated professional staff located in 14 countries across 5 continents. So these are ORCID's 3 main services. The first one I'm sure you're aware of is the ORCID ID, which is a unique persistent identifier free of charge for all researchers on the planet. The second one is the ORCID record, which is a digital CV or profile connected to the ORCID ID that can include employment, education, funding, peer review, research outputs, and other metadata. And finally, the ORCID APIs. Now, these are a set of programming interfaces, or APIs as we know them, as well as the services and support of communities of practice, enabling interoperability between an ORCID record and member organizations. ORCID have been around for almost 14 years, which is pretty exciting, and it's pretty well embedded and established within the global research ecosystem. Researchers have registered for an ORCID in almost every country on the planet, and ORCID have member organizations across 67 different countries, with 28 national consortia and 2 regional consortia offering membership to universities and not-for-profit organizations. In total, ORCID has close to 1,500 member organizations who have collectively integrated close to 7,500 different systems within the ORCID registry. ORCID's vision is all about a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected to their contributions across disciplines, borders, and time. And its mission is all about enabling transparent and trustworthy connections between researchers, their contributions, and their affiliations by providing a unique, persistent identifier for individuals who use as they engage in research, scholarship, and innovation activities. So everything ORCID does is guided by its values around being inclusive, being open, and being trusted, and underpinned by its founding principles. And you'll see on the slide here, there's 10 founding principles. With I suppose the principle at the bottom, number 10, is all around making sure that ORCID is well governed across with a really strong cross-section of stakeholders from not-for-profit and all about striving for maximum transparency, etc., for governing ORCID. So number 10 is one of the important founding principles around governance. So as ORCID, as an organization, we were founded with both legal and social constructs that would support and uphold our values to help us earn and earn the broadest possible trust of the communities we serve. ORCID, as a not-for-profit research infrastructure organization, is registered in the USA, as I mentioned before, and we owe a lot of our success to earning the trust, to being open to participation by all. So we're a community-built and governed organization by a board of directors, and which is representative of its membership with a wide stakeholder representation. Importantly, our privacy policy is regulated by GDPR and other national regulations, and we employ legally binding membership agreements to be part of ORCID. So let's move on to board roles and responsibilities. So as I mentioned before, ORCID is a US not-for-profit corporation governed by an independent board of directors, and these are the key board responsibilities. The first one is around developing and regularly updating the ORCID strategic plan. The next one is around reviewing high-level organizational goals and policies to support that plan. Next is all about overseeing ORCID's organizational and financial performance. Next is all about ensuring ORCID has financial resources to achieve its mission. Making sure that there's strong monitoring functions going on within the board, for example, monitoring risk. Appointing the executive director and reviewing their performance, as well as serving as a community advocate for ORCID. So this slide shows, I suppose, the difference between the board and the role of management and the executive director within the organization. In regards to the board is responsible for hiring and reviewing the executive director's performance, where the executive hires and reviews other staff within the organization. The board sets the strategic vision and plan with input from the executive director, where the executive and management team are responsible for executing that strategic plan. And I'm sure you can see that the real difference between the board and the management team and the executive director, where the board is all around the strategy and the good governance, approving budgets, those sort of things, where the executive director and the management team are responsible for executing those outcomes. So this slide shows a really nice pictorial overview of the board governance structure that operates within ORCID. As mentioned before, ORCID is a not-for-profit organization registered under Delaware Corporations Law. It has its certificate of incorporation. It's governed by bylaws, as well as a number of board-approved policies and principles. The board within itself has a number of key officers that have roles within the board chair, and I am the board chair for 2026. We have a treasurer, which is another role, which is all around making sure just good oversight and supporting the board around the financial responsibilities of the board. We have our company secretary, which is Stephanie, which we all know Stephanie well. And that's really sort of oversight of some of the key areas around those duties, around minutes, meetings, those sort of things. And as well, we've got the executive director, which attends the meeting. Let's move on. So let's move on to directors' duties. And I think that's pretty important that we understand that directors have a number of key duties as being part of a board. And you'll see these are pretty common for anyone that's had experience of being on a board before. And directors, importantly, are bound by what they call fiduciary duties. There are three of them. The first one is a duty of care. The next one is a duty of loyalty. And the third one is a duty of obedience. So let's go through them a little bit further. So a director owes a duty to exercise reasonable care and prudence when they make a decision as a member of the board. Importantly, for example, attending meetings, asking the hard questions, and getting the information that the director needs to make the right decisions. The director may rely on information from experts as part of making the decisions, and also the director is also involved in collective decision making. So working very closely with other directors and also understanding the views and opinions of management in making those decisions. So that's the first one, duty of care. The next one is around duty of loyalty. Importantly, a director must give undivided allegiance and act in ORCID's best interest when making decisions that are affecting ORCID. This is all about making decisions as an ORCID director, not as an institutional representative. Disclosing conflicts of interest and refraining from deliberating and voting when conflicted. And that's all about managing conflicts of interest. Not using information obtained as a director for personal benefit, as well as maintaining the confidentiality of non-public board information. And finally, the next one, duty of obedience. Directors must at all times be faithful to ORCID's mission when making decisions for ORCID and acting on behalf of ORCID. This is all about having a firm understanding of ORCID's mission, taking actions that are consistent with the central goals of the organisation, and ensuring that funds raised to fulfil ORCID's mission are spent accordingly in line with that. So in summary, there are a number of roles within the board, as we've discussed before. The chair has a really important working relationship with the executive directory and that conduit through from the board to management. There are regular meetings and board papers that the board directors are responsible for reviewing and making sure they have a solid understanding of before attending and during the board meetings. We mentioned before, you saw on that diagram, there were some board committees. All board directors are required to be part of 1 to 2 board committees and provide input with those and be part of that. The ORCID board is a working board. Making sure there's good feedback loops and strategic alignment and shared commitment. I think directors have a shared commitment with the staff and the organisation for organisational success. So let's talk about that commitment. So the board, being on a board, there is a time commitment with the ORCID board. In regards to the board meetings, there are 2 full 2-day in-person meetings. They're usually in March and September. With travel required. Those meetings are held at various locations around the world. There are also 2 4-hour virtual meetings in May and November, and they're split across multiple days and global time zones. So as a director, you may be on the meeting from, for example, 10 p.m. till midnight, or 5 a.m. till 7 a.m. in the morning. So just worth noting that it is a global board and there are representatives from the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific region. As I mentioned before, there are committees on the board, and the board members must serve on 1 to 2 committees annually. And these are virtual meetings, typically held 4 times a year. They're 1-hour meetings, and once again, often outside standard working hours. So you may be on a meeting late at night or very early in the morning. In regards to preparation for the board, you are required to review all meeting materials in advance, so making sure you've read and be prepared to make substantive contributions to both board and committee work. As I mentioned before, the ORCID is a working board and all directors are required to contribute and be part of the discussions and decision-making and governance process. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 meetings held at various locations around the world. And to support directors, those directors that do need some financial assistance, there is an attendance fund, which helps cover the travel costs associated with that. And I'm going to hand over to Carly to talk to us about the nominations process. Thanks, Carly.
Thank you, Heath. Really appreciate it. It's really great to be with you all today and to share a bit more about the nomination process. So as mentioned, I'm the chair of the nominating committee, and our committee is one of the standing board committees, and we facilitate this process each year to fill any of the open board seats. There we go. So ORCID, being a community-driven organization, of course, is governed by the Board of Representatives that Heath was just describing, and we have um, participation on board from a wide cross section of our members. There are a total of up to 16 seats on the board at any given time. And so we hold elections each year to fill any open board positions. We do have staggered board terms, so there is a portion of the board that rolls off each year, and then we look to fill those open positions. The majority of board members are member directors, which are representatives from member organizations, and the majority of those being from nonprofit organizations. Member directors serve a 3-year term, and you may stand for election up to 2 consecutive terms, so that would be a total of 6 years. And these member directors need to be employees, directors, or officers of their ORCID member organization. There are also 2 seats on the board reserved specifically for researchers, and those are researcher director positions. And those positions don't have to be filled by people affiliated with a member organization. So, with ORCID being a community-driven organization governed by our board, we hold elections to ensure that the community participates in nominating individuals to the board that will then be considered by the nominating committee for elections. We also want to ensure that individuals in the community are provided an opportunity to vote for those board members. We work hard to ensure that we have fair election processes and that we run those uh, with an auditable process. So, community member participation is really a key part, the key part of our elections. So, talking a bit about how the election process works, individuals from member organizations, in the case of member directors, are nominated to serve on the board, often through self nominations. And these individuals are then considered by the nominating committee, who puts together a slate of nominees to be considered by the entire board. At one of the board meetings, the board considers that slate and moves forward with an approved slate that is approved by the board. And then that slate goes out goes out to all ORCID members, and they are elected by a majority vote of ORCID members. But I also wanted to mention a part of the process that's included in our bylaws that puts forward a way to nominate someone who is not included on that slate. So this provides an opportunity for write-in candidates to be nominated for election. And the way that this would happen is if there's a group of 20 or more members that put forth another nominee that's not on the slate, within 30 days of the slate being announced, that write-in candidate would be added on. And if a write-in candidate nomination is received, elections are then by plurality vote amongst the slate and any of the write-in candidates. So this year, we're looking to fill up to 6 member director board seats. And the committee and the board have come up with a list of criteria that we're looking for in candidates to fill knowledge and skill areas that are really important for the board's success. And so, specifically, the nominating committee will be looking for candidates who meet 2 or more of the following criteria. So representing one of the stakeholder groups, funders, or facilities, is based in Europe or Latin American region, have a track record for advocating on behalf of ORCID within their region and community, are knowledgeable about ORCID and other scholarly infrastructures, have financial expertise, including an understanding of organizational finance, and might be willing to serve as a treasurer in the future, and then has demonstrable demonstrable experience in organizational government and senior level management. And each year we come up with criteria like these, considering the skills and experience of current board members as well as those rolling off the board. So we want to make sure that, we have global representation, that we're representing different stakeholder groups. And so this criteria does change each year depending on the skills and experience that we're looking to fill. So for this year, these are the criteria that we'll be looking at on putting together the slate of nominees. And then lastly, wanted to share the election timeline. So we announced the call for nominations on May 27th, and that is open through June 26th. Once all of those nominations are received, the nominating committee will consider those and will develop a slate over July and August. And then at the September board meeting, we'll present that slate to the board for consideration and approval. Once the board has approved the slate, it'll be made public. If there are any alternative write-in nominations, those will need to be received by November 4th. And then we open voting the next day on December 5th, and each ORCID member has a voting contact that receives details about how to vote electronically. The voting closes on December 1st, and then we'll announce those during a virtual meeting. And then the newly elected board members start their term the first board meeting of the next year, which is scheduled for March 2nd and 3rd. So with that, I will hand it over to Stephanie.
Great. Thank you so much, Carly. And I'll share a little bit of more information about the ORCID Researcher Advisory Council. As Heath mentioned earlier, we have 2 researcher seats on the board. But a few years back, the board was discussing that really we can't represent millions and millions of researchers with just 2 researcher seats on the board, and decided to create this Researcher Advisory Council. And this council is made up of a diverse group of researchers who can provide additional feedback and advice to the board and staff. And it is co-chaired by our 2 researcher director members of the board, and our product director, executive director, and myself work closely with the council as well. And ORAC meets twice a year virtually, and can meet additionally if needed, if different topics come up. But when it meets, we tend to have deep dive sessions on certain topics so that researchers can really provide feedback on what ORCID is doing or thinking about doing. This is one example from a workshop we did with ORAC last year, where our product team held a workshop with our researchers on the council to provide feedback on featured works. And they took that feedback and then built something based on it. So we really value our council members in helping us keep researchers, at the center of all that we do. I'll just share a little bit more information. We have a number of seats open this year, and it is a great way to become more familiar with ORCID. If you're interested in board serving on the board, maybe in a future year, at be a researcher, consider applying to the council this year and becoming acquainted with us and learning more about what we do in ORCID governance. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kimberly for questions.
Excellent. Well, firstly, I just want to thank you all for this wonderful presentation. Give everyone a few minutes to gather their thoughts. We've got plenty of time for questions. I've also got another poll I'm going to launch to get some feedback from you all on the call to see what you're thinking now that you've had a chance to hear from our board representatives. And I'm also going to share a link in the chat to check out our blog post that covers a lot of the information that was covered in today's presentation. So you have it in multiple formats now. So you'll have the recording, we'll share the presentation, and you also have the blog post. So as we give everyone a few moments to gather their thoughts, I've got a couple of questions from registration. Um, Firstly, Heath, could you kind of walk us through the day-to-day realities of serving on the board? Could you give an estimated expected time commitment for a 3-year term? You know, there's virtual meetings, in-person travel, and committee work.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. Look, really good question. So this is my second term on the ORCID board. So I'm into my fourth year. And look, I've really enjoyed being part of the governance of such an amazing organization that has a really diverse group of directors with a broad range of skills supporting the needs of ORCID and ensuring that, really good decisions are being made. It does involve personal time, whether that's within your work remit or out of hours. Um, I spend for myself. So let's take out the fact that I'm the board chair this year, but as a normal director, you are a part of 1 to 2 committees, as we mentioned earlier. So there are papers prior to the committee meeting that you're involved in reviewing, getting some thoughts around, maybe researching on the topic, and then being part of that meeting on the day. So that meeting, as I mentioned earlier, they can be at any time during the day or night. So it's important that as a board member that you make the time and you are at that meeting, you are prepared for that meeting like you would be prepared for any other meeting, and done your research and be prepared to have a good discussion. There may be some further follow-up from those meetings as well, like any meeting where you may have to go away and you may be part of working committees, reviewing papers, having some side discussions with other board members or committee members, and then coming back to a future meeting. So as we mentioned earlier, the committees meet 4 times a year, and you could be on 1 to 2 committees. The committee meetings are usually anywhere between 1 to 2 hours for each meeting. In regard to the board meetings, we mentioned there are 2 face-to-face meetings annually. They're held over two pretty full days. They're in person. We do expect you to attend those meetings in person. There is, of course, that travel time to get to that meeting. So depending on where you are in the world and where the meeting is, it could be over sort of a 24-hour period, could be over a weekend, it could be overnight, or it could be just down the road and very easy for you to get to. But so there, of course, there are those travel commitments. But as part of that, for those board meetings, there is usually a board book with the papers, which has all been very well structured. And those papers can be anywhere from maybe 110 to 200 pages worth of papers. So there's quite a bit of information to go through across a number of topics from, for example, risk, finances within the organization. There could be reports from the committees, information about membership, strategic direction and thinking, and other things around that. So yeah, so 2 face-to-face, 2 full-day meetings, and also for the board, those 2 virtual online meetings, which are held over 2 time periods, so about 4 hours in total. But once again, you have to become prepared for a good, robust discussion, and yeah, it's like anything that you do throughout your career or any meeting. It's important that you become prepared for a good discussion. Think about what questions you need to ask to discharge your duties as a director. So that's important, that you need to think that you've got a role of being part of the ORCID board, and you've got to be there.
If I could maybe add to that as well, second everything that Heath just said. I have found I'm still relatively new to the board. This is my second year, but have found the meetings fun as well. Right? So a lot of really hard work that goes in by kind of everyone on the board and the staff to prepare for those. The meetings are very well run, but we get to really dig into very interesting topics, and potential future directions, and there are some social aspects to that as well. So it is hard, some hard work and time commitment, but get to really dig into interesting topics and enjoy really good company with a very broad group of folks from our membership that is serving on the board.
Yeah, I'll note
Absolutely.
that we've had feedback from board members that it's really quite a collegial board and productive board. And we run assessments each year to see, how the board thinks we're doing. We did an external assessment last year, and we tend to get great feedback. And um, folks enjoyed serving, learning, and helping ORCID, continue to grow. It really is community governed, a good board community.
And really great points. And also you get to bring your skill to the board as well. So being a diverse board with different skills and different areas, and whether that's regional knowledge or knowledge in, for example, finance or other areas or marketing, communication, engagement, growth, company growth, those sort of things. You get to be part of really interesting, great discussions in areas that we all bring special hats to the table to talk about areas that we're all very passionate about as well. So it's really rewarding to be part of something that you can contribute to and continue to support ORCID in its amazing success.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for such in-depth answers. So it sounds like if you enjoy a bit of light reading, um, join the board and we'll make the most of your time. Um, I noticed when it comes to the nomination criteria this year, we're particularly looking for folks located in Europe and Latin America. Can you all talk a little bit about how the ORCID board maintains a strategic balance between diverse stakeholder sectors and locations to ensure that, ORCID and its infrastructure is serving all of our members around the globe?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure.
Happy to
Kick things
kick off.
Yeah.
Maybe Stephanie's got some thoughts as well. Yeah, so it's important around geographical diversity within ORCID and making sure that we have that regional representation from different areas around the globe. And that brings some really interesting broad discussion and thinking to the board, making sure that we continue to represent the needs of all communities and all countries that are part of ORCID, and making sure we acknowledge that and understand how we, roll out and deliver a successful product suite of services and products and engagements and consultations, and making sure that we've got the membership fees right and all those sort of things to make sure that ORCID can deliver what it needs to do on a global scale. And as you can imagine, it's quite an interesting task delivering ORCID on that global level. So hence the importance of making sure that ORCID has that good representation, and maybe Carly's got a few points around why particular those regions have been identified for this year.
Sure, and I'm sure Stephanie can say a little bit more towards this, but we do kind of a skills survey and background information about kind of the current board members, so that way we can have an understanding of what we'll need to fill with new members rolling on the board. And so with this year, we have a couple of folks from those regions that are rolling off the board, and so we want to make sure that we continue to have representation and are trying to as much as possible mirror membership, and also so that our kind of members are well represented. And so want to make sure, as he said, that we have folks from those regions and that they're well represented.
Yeah, and similarly with the finance criteria this year, we have our treasurer who'll be rolling off in a year. So we're just thinking ahead and trying to keep succession planning in mind. And Carly and the nominating committee as a whole is it's quite a thoughtful process of how to build out a slate that really complements the rest of the board and takes, future planning into account. And it's quite a feat. And we look forward to, going through all these strong applications, and building out this year's slate.
Great, thank you all for that. And then similarly, can you talk a little bit about how ORCID benefits from including both member and researcher directors on the board? Do you find that these perspectives complement each other in decision making? Can you just talk a little bit about why we include researchers along with members?
Yeah, at ORCID, we say researchers are at the center of everything we do, and so we really want them to have a voice on the board, and they've been absolutely crucial in past board conversations to provide that perspective. I don't know, Heath or Carly, if you want to add anything else, but they definitely serve an important role on the board.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephanie. And the services that ORCID delivers, researchers are the primary users of those services. So it's important that they, I suppose, in making good governance and making sure we're having the right discussions, making sure that we've got the voice of the researchers at the table as we're having these discussions and understanding, how decisions that are being made impact or interface with their needs, and helping ORCID evolve, and making good, strategic decisions moving forward with their input is super important.
And maybe just to add, so of course you could have a research background and be a researcher yourself and serve as a member director, bringing your experience through a membership organization. But I think it's also really important that those researcher directors do not have to be associated with a member organization, to be able to kind of bring in broader perspectives, and especially also through the ORAC committee to kind of bring that diverse set of perspectives to make sure that the services that ORCID is providing are really serving the broad research community.
Great, thank you. And Carly, since you brought up ORAC, that does lead nicely into my next question. Maybe Stephanie, could you help us understand the difference between like the main board of directors and the ORCID Research Advisory Council, and let us just remind us how many seats are open on ORAC and what exactly we're looking for them?
Sure. So, um, and there are a few differences. One that really jumps out is just time commitment. If you're a researcher director on the board, you'll be attending those board meetings in person. You'll be on a committee. You'll really be fully involved on the board, and all that goes along with it. So in some way, ORAC is a nice introduction to ORCID and governance and how we work. So those researcher directors serve as the ORAC co-chairs, and ORAC is meeting, twice a year in these virtual workshops. So it's a lower time commitment, which is nice. It also allows us to have 20 plus ORAC members, and we really span the globe there. It's wonderful when we do introductions to hear where everyone is calling in from, and it allows us to get a great perspective on how ORCID products or policies, communications, et cetera, might impact different researchers in different sectors or regions. And with ORAC, we really look at discipline, career stage. We try and make that as representative as possible. So we just have kind of more opportunities to pull from the community. And yeah, and have those council members get acquainted with ORCID.
And and just because I didn't say this explicitly, I'm talking about researcher directors on the board. We do have two positions, and this just happens to be a year that neither of those are rolling off. So this year we only are filling the member director positions, but in future years we will be looking to fill researcher director positions as our current two roll off.
Great, thanks for that clarification, Carly. And then just a quick follow-up for you, Stephanie. So if someone is interested in getting involved with ORCID, but they don't necessarily have the experience with governance necessary for the board, but they are an active researcher within the community, would ORAC be a good opportunity for them to get involved with ORCID?
Yes, definitely. It's a great place to start getting involved and learning more about what we do, how we operate, seeing what that governance looks like. You'll be able to see, how our researcher directors co-chair this council, and again, just kind of become more familiar with ORCID.
Excellent, thank you. We do have plenty of time for questions, so encourage, if you have anything weighing on your mind, please submit it to us via the chat or Q&A. I was taking a look at the poll results, and I noticed there are a few that noted that they're very interested, but they're a bit hesitant to apply or nominate themselves or a colleague for the board. So if you want to share about your hesitation, we'd be happy to talk to you about it and see if we can get you some answers. Looking at the nomination process, so Carly, perhaps this one's for you. Once the nominating committee reviews application after the June deadline in a few weeks, how is the final voting slate determined, and how can voting member institutions participate in the election process later this year?
Yeah, so obviously the kind of initial way to participate is by nominating someone to be considered for the slate. So you can do that yourself, or you can nominate someone else. And then kind of that next step is the nomination committee looking at all of the applications, looking at the criteria. Part of the application process is kind of sharing more about any of those criteria that we have listed, and kind of how you could fulfill any of those, or kind of what your background is, and what you could bring to the board. So the nominating committee considers all of that. We consider all of the nominations that come in, the number of seats that we have, and look to put together a slate of nominations that kind of fit the skills and experience that we're looking to fill, and kind of work with existing board members to make sure that we have broad representation, broad experience from all across the globe. And so what we will do is put together a slate as the nominating committee, and then we bring that to the board for consideration. And so the board, also has a chance to kind of take a look at the slate that we put together, ask us any questions and considerations, and then the board needs to approve the final slate that then goes out to all members to vote on. And so each member organization has a vote, and there's a voting point of contact. So ORCID is great about sending reminder emails, making sure that your voting point of contact is up to date. And so that person will receive an email with voting information, and they get to vote on the slate.
Excellent, very thorough. Thank you, Carly. And taking a look at the nomination criteria again, one of the criteria is having a track record of advocating on behalf of ORCID within their region and community. Do you have any examples, or how you're looking for this to be demonstrated in a nomination?
Maybe I can start, and then would love others to add to that. So I think this can really look, there's no one way that this looks like, right? So it can be, being the kind of lead in your organization who is talking about ORCID, or talking about your membership, or kind of doing that integration. Sometimes it is librarians at institutions who are, kind of promoting the use of ORCID IDs within in their institution. In my case, and kind of my previous role, I was the lead for one of the ORCID consortia in the US. And so, was regularly kind of talking to the members in our consortia and going to conferences to talk about the work that we were doing with our consortia, things like that. If you're involved, if you happen to be a researcher and you're talking to your colleagues, and if you're publishing and you make sure that all of your co-authors have an ORCID ID associated with it, it can be really broad, and there's no kind of one thing that you need to be doing. I think it's being, somewhat familiar with kind of what ORCID is trying to do, ORCID infrastructure services. Hopefully you're using it yourself. Even if you are not, publishing papers yourself, there's so much in the ORCID record to make sure that, it is up to date. So being familiar with that, and just, talking, whether it's at your institution or at, kind of broader places, conferences where you happen to be. I'm sure there's a lot more to add, so please, Heath, Stephanie.
Thanks, Carly. I think you summed it up really nicely. But I suppose just reflecting on my personal experience, I are involved in the organisation that runs the ORCID Consortium in Australia. Been involved in a number of working groups around the adoption of ORCID within the institutions. Been involved in developing papers and strategies around the use of ORCID and what does it mean, what is the value of ORCID, but also involved in other things around discussions and, at meetings or conferences or events where I've run into people that are involved or work for funding agencies, for example, and talking to them about why ORCID's important and why should they adopt ORCID. So I think as Carly mentioned, there's sort of not one size. There's sort of one size. There's not one size. There's not one particular area. There's just many areas that through your day-to-day jobs and careers where you've had, I've had touch points with ORCID, and also ORCID staff as well. So I had a lot of engagement with ORCID staff over the years. So, I felt that brought for me a really good understanding around, what are the key things that are on the table for ORCID moving into the future. So, yeah.
And Heath, you hit on funders, and so two of the areas that we're looking at are funders and facilities. So maybe I can talk a little bit about if you're coming from that. So funders, right? I think that could be maybe you're involved in developing policy around persistent identifiers and things like that, and ORCID might be part of that. On the facility side, I know I'll just use my kind of background within our US government consortium. We had a lot of the user facilities. So these are supercomputers, light sources, neutron sources, things like that. And we had kind of folks there that were thinking a lot about persistent identifiers and kind of incorporating into the systems that they were building around kind of users of those facilities. And so just also want to encourage, Heath and I both have a background coming from consortia, but you absolutely do not have to be, at the consortium lead organization. You can be members of consortia, involved in those organizations. I think those are incredibly important perspectives that we want to bring to the board as well.
Great, thank you both for that. Looking at time, we've got time for a couple more questions, and I've got two final questions. Firstly, Heath, could you share what the current priorities or future projects that this group of new board members would be working on, or what it would look like to advocate for the community on behalf of ORCID as a sitting board member over the coming years?
Yeah, look, great question. And I'm sure many of you have seen through a number of ORCID's posts this year. ORCID's just released its 2030 Advancing the Futures of Research strategic plan. They call ORCID 2030. And really, it's the next strategic plan from this year all the way through to that period. And it's really about expanding the value and scope of ORCID as a verifiable identity and contribution data hub in order to proactively empower the global research community and advance transparent, trustworthy scholarship. So really exciting. And look, it's across 5 pillars. So one is around empowering research. The next one is connecting research information. The next one is around broadening our community. The next one is around advancing trust and integrity. And as you can imagine, that's a super important topic with everything that's going on in the world. And finally, strengthening ORCID's resiliency. So that's just a bit of, I suppose, a bit of a taster of some of the things that as a board we'll be looking at how we can address some of those strategic pillars. But like any board, there is a number of evolving areas that the board is working on. Some of them are more operational, some of them are more strategic. And some of them are just at the early stages of, I suppose, conception or incubation in what it is. So that, you know, as the board, you know, you work through these things over a number of meetings, and sometimes, you know, it could be a couple of meetings, or it could take 12 to 18 months, maybe even 2 years to work through the topic. Yeah, you know, many things as mentioned around increasing membership in underrepresented areas, and you know, other things which, as I said before, more specific to the operations around policy, which enable the successful day-to-day running of the organization.
Awesome, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I do just want to share my screen one final time. And Carly, would you mind walking us through the nomination timeline one more time?
Yeah, happy to. So nominations for nominating yourself or for others are open until June 26th. And that's when we will close those. And so nominating committee will take a couple of months to review those nominations, look at the criteria, and put together a slate that will then be considered by the board at the September board meeting. The board does need to confirm the slate before it is made public. That'll be made public October 5th. And then we've got about a month there until November 7th if there are any alternative nominations that folks want to put forth for someone who isn't on that slate. And then voting opens. So I'll defer to Stephanie or Kimberly. I think there's a couple of emails that go out kind of in that time reminding folks about voting and getting the necessary information to the voting contacts so that they're ready for voting to open in early November on the 5th. We have just about a month for voting to be open, and then we will close and announce the results at a virtual member meeting.
Yep, that's right. And we will be reaching out to all member organizations to confirm voting contacts and making sure we have all the information correct before that process begins.
Yes, we do our best to communicate it early and often so everybody's ready to vote when it comes time. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think you all did a wonderful job of giving everybody the information that they need for this nomination process this year. I want to thank you all for joining us. Excellent presentation and a wonderful resource for those who are looking to nominate themselves or a colleague, or really just wanted to get some more information about how the ORCID board works. But I think y'all are speakers today, Heath, Carly, and Stephanie, for joining me today. And thank you to our attendees for your excellent questions. And we hope to see you submit a nomination and at a future ORCID event. Thanks, everybody.